So let's practice doing this k-means clustering in Tableau and see how that works. So the first file we want to use is that salary data file. It's on Canvas if you look under Chapter 5 in Class Excel files. So if you go to More, this is a CSV file. So once it's downloaded, you can connect it to Tableau and then go ahead and use the data interpreter. And so this data has the employee ID number for a bunch of employees, their years of experience, and their salary. And so if I go to sheet 1, the employee ID number is just numbering them off. That isn't a very useful, maybe, descriptor of an attribute of the employee, but salary and years of experience are. So two quantitative variables, if I want to kind of compare both of these, I might want to make a scatter plot for these two variables. So if I double click salary and double click years of experience, right now it's just adding up all of them and showing me 1 point. So if I go up to analysis on the top, I want to uncheck aggregate measures. Now this looks like a scatter plot. And so if I go to marks, I'm going to choose circle. This gives me my scatter plot. And here, this is showing years of experience and salary, and in general, it looks like as years of experience goes up, so does the salary. And so this might be a good candidate for a problem for linear regression. If I went to analytics, I could choose to put a trend line here, and that would help me predict, if I know that a person has 11 years of experience, what would I maybe expect their salary to be? But let's see how Tableau would do this k-means clustering. So if I double click, I'm in the Analytics tab, and under Model, if I double click on Cluster, it will pop up with something asking me how many clusters I want, and automatically in this example it looks like it's set to 2. That seems good here. So I'm going to leave it at 2, and let's see what it did. It broke my points up into 2 different groups. And so here it's kind of grouped these higher ones together and grouped the lower ones together. And depending on what you want to do, maybe 2 groups is what you want, or maybe you want to break your employees into more groups for some reason. It depends on what you're doing, but maybe you'd want 3 or 4 clusters. So I could go to Edit Clusters, and maybe I'll choose 3 clusters. And we can see how it would group the points if we had 3 clusters, or you could try 4. And behind the scenes, Tableau is doing this k-means clustering. So let's look at another example of how we would do this. In the slides, it said next we'd be looking at the online retail data file. We're going to skip that one because my computer was having issues with it, but it's on Canvas if you want to play with it. But we're going to go ahead now and look at the all production edited one Excel file. So this file name is all_production_edited1. And so on Tableau, we'll connect to this Excel file. And this is the file that shows information about natural resource revenue. And so we can choose one of the sheets from this Excel file. I'm going to choose fiscal year production and drag that to the middle. So this has this fiscal year, land class, land category, and the state, county, what's called the FIPS code, and we have information about the product, so like oil, gas, coal, the volume, all of these different things. So let's go to sheet 1, and there are a lot of things we could do. So let's say we wanted to group or cluster different states together based on these values. So let's maybe look at the volume of gas and the volume of oil. So we could do something similar to what we did before. We could double click volume of gas, double click volume of oil, change this to not be an aggregate measure so that we get a scatter plot, and we could change our marks to circles instead of open points. Great. And what we could do is now drag state to detail So now if I scroll over these different points, it should tell me the states. Well, some of them it looks like might not have state data. So some of these might be blank. But that's okay. Let's leave it the way it is. And we could go back to analytics and we could cluster. So double click cluster. And I'm going to leave it with the automatic number of clusters. Okay, so we have some different clusters here, and it looks like a lot of things weren't clustered. It looks like because they don't have a state. And so I might exclude those just so we can look at what's going on here. And we have these different clusters. But if we're talking about states, it might make more sense to visualize this on a map. So I'm going to go make a new sheet, and let's start looking at a map. So I'm going to double click state and then change our marks to map so that we can look at this map of the United States. And we don't have information about all the states, so some of these are blank, but right now we just have a bunch of different states here. And let's say I want to do that same thing. I want to cluster based on volume of gas and volume of oil. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take volume of gas, drag it to detail, and volume of oil I'm going to drag to detail. Now, if I go to analytics, I can cluster based on those variables. So now I'm going to double click cluster, and it's using those variables that are under detail. And so I can choose how many clusters. I don't know what a good number would be here. We could play with this a little bit and see how states would be clustered together based on these variables. And something nice about this is when we were doing scatter plots before, we were kind of limited to two-dimensional things. We were limited to clustering based on two different dimensions. But when we're doing it this way, we can drag way more variables to detail and cluster on as many different variables as we want that are helpful. And so if I had information about, population or volume of coal production or, any of these other things, I could cluster based on more variables. Actually, let's see if we do have other variables here. So I'm going to undo several of these steps. I'm going to go back to data, and we can see if we have any other values. So it looks like here I don't see any other things that would be entirely helpful. We would be looking for quantitative variables to cluster on, but if we had, let's say, volume of coal here, we could drag that to detail as well and go and cluster based on those variables. And so on some of the assignments, I might ask you to cluster on more than two variables, which you can do in Tableau, which is really handy. So even though we can't visualize something that's in more than maybe 2 or 3 dimensions, we could do this clustering, this k-means clustering in Tableau, and visualize on the map what states would be grouped together in this clustering.